cowboys, cowgirls, and outlaws. Welcome to the Slick Six Guns Network. I'm your host, Slick Six Guns, and this week we are going to be doing a historical video on none other than the Colt Single Action Army. That and more coming right up. Horses, outlaws. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and smash that notifications button before moving on. Before we get to the video, I would personally like to thank my patrons that have contributed to this channel. First of all, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to continue to spread the word about Western life as well as a love for Western history and gear. And so, thank you so much for your assistance, and we can always use the help. For those of you who are interested in supporting the Slick Six Guns Network, I will be leaving a link to my Patreon account in the description of this video, and feel free to visit it at any time should you want to donate. Thank you very much. I've been hearing a lot of feedback from my channel and Facebook page, and I just want to let you guys know that I have answered your Facebook preferences for those of you who have been requesting it. We are going to do a historical video on none other than the Colt Single Action Army. This is an actual Colt Single Action Army. This is not a Colt clone, and we're going to talk about the history of it. But before I get into the history of it, let me first describe this pistol. It is a third generation Colt Single Action Army. It is a commemorative edition made for the NRA, called the NRA Centennial Model. It's actually printed here on the side of the barrel. It's chambered in .45 Colt. It is a blued barrel. It has a blued cylinder, wood grips on it, and it's a color case hardened frame. And just to prove to you that it is actually a Colt, I'm going to go ahead and pull the hammer, because we all know that Colt hammers, and some replicas, have a 4-click to a full cock. So here we go. C-O-L-T. Here we go. We got a Colt right here, guys. This is my first Colt Single Action Army that I've actually shown anyone, and also we'll get the chance to shoot this when we get to the shooting video. But I'm really excited about this because the Colt Single Action Army has a very interesting history. For those of you who heard me talk about some of the histories, I have a tendency to get really in depth, and that's going to be pretty much the same for this revolver. Colt 1873 came after the 1871-1872 open top, and like the 1871-1872 open top, it would feature a cartridge system. Unlike the 1860 percussion revolver, which was cap and ball. For those of you that don't know, that's a completely separate system from a cartridge where you have the primer, the powder, and the ball separate from each other, and the cartridge system has all of it placed into a metallic cartridge. Well, unlike the 1871 and the 1872, which was rimfire, even though it was a metallic cartridge, it was rimfire, the Colt Single Action Army was actually made into what you would call a central fire system. And this actually came out of Colt's desperation for another military contract with a revolver. And he was competing with another firearms company in the process. And this one was actually Smith & Wesson. Smith & Wesson had actually marketed their model number 3s to the U.S. government, and they basically wanted the military contracts as well. So Colt decided to pursue a military contract in this particular centerfire version of his models, and he set it up against the Model 3. He got some advice from some of his plant supervisors that he was supposed to chamber this in .44 Russian because of the preferred cartridge and the marketability of it. However, the American government wanted it chambered in .44 American. When they submitted this weapon for trials, it was chambered in .44 American centerfire. The Smith & Wesson revolver model number 3 was chambered in the same cartridge. When they went up against each other in 1873, the Colt Single Action Army proved far superior to the Smith & Wesson model number 3. Basically for the sheer fact that this was a stronger system and they saw it as more reliable, and for the ability to basically market this more towards the cavalry. And you're going to see that Smith & Wesson will eventually get their revolvers to the cavalry, but that actually would be more with the development of the Schofield revolver, which is a version of the model number 3, but it's got some variances. But for the most part, the government, instead of going with the model number 3, even though it still had the ability to break open and eject all of the cartridges at once, they saw that this was a lot stronger and had the ability to essentially be more reliable. This had less moving parts than a Smith & Wesson model number 3, which is another reason. Every revolver that was picked for the U.S. government would come with a screwdriver. You're going to need one anyway to take these apart with the screws. So every pistol came with a screwdriver, and it came at $13 a piece. The first contract of 30,000 or so came to the U.S. Ordnance Department and were shipped directly to the cavalry. The cavalry really liked these revolvers. Still, they were given to other portions of the military, to include the infantry and the artillery. But none of them came in the 5.5-inch barrel. This is a 5.5-inch barrel here, but they came in the 7.5-inch barrel. Around the year 1877, you hear that Winchester is starting to think about coming out with a pistol that is going to be on the market as well, because we know that Winchester is actually more known for their rifle, specifically with the 1860 Henry rifle, moving on up to the 1866 and 1873. And by this time, the 1873 Winchester was out and still going. So as far as a pistol caliber rifle, it would be great for them, as they saw, if they were able to produce a pistol that would be in the same caliber. Well, Colt decided that he wasn't going to have any of that. He didn't want Winchester to take any of the pistol market. There was kind of always this agreement that Winchester and Colt would share different sides of the market. Colt would produce the pistols, whereas Winchester would produce the rifles. So what Colt did was he manufactured his pistol for the 4440 or the 44 Winchester, not for the idea that everybody would be able to carry a pistol and a rifle in the same caliber, but more to the fact that Colt just didn't want Winchester to take the pistol market, so he basically took that off the table when he manufactured these Colts in the 4440 round. Before that, he actually had it chambered in 45 Colt, which had been around the same time that the first generation began being shipped to the Ordnance Department. What they found out was that the 45 Colt was a very good round. The only issue was that the Army had also ordered 45 caliber Schofields, which were the modified model number 3s that they would also use. Well, the problem was that the Schofield revolvers took a shorter round, even though it was the same caliber. What you had the ability to do was you would have military units end up getting 45 single action armies, and then they'd be given cases of 45 ammo, and some of them would be shorter than the standard rounds. That's no problem, because this can take a 45 Schofield and a 45 Colt, but you can't load a 45 Colt into a Schofield revolver, because the cartridge rim will actually stick out the back, causing the weapon to not even lock into place so that it can be fired, or it can't even close it. That was kind of where you had the introduction of the 45 Colt round into the military arsenal. This had an extremely large amount of popularity as a revolver. It was marketed more towards the military, but the civilian market eventually caught on, and eventually what ended up happening was Colt appealed to the civilian market by manufacturing 500 initially to the civilian market, and they bought it up. Sometimes soldiers would conveniently lose their weapons on the frontier, in which they were paid a significant amount of money to give one of these to a civilian. This revolver came in 3 different generations. The first generation, also known as the pre-war generation, came out between 1873 and 1940. Some of the first generation Colts, if you ever see them, will have what's called a bullseye ejector rod and that's basically a full circle on the ejector rod rather than the half moon look. And they'll also have, instead of a push base pin, they'll have a screw right here in the center of the frame that you'd actually unscrew in order to take the base pin out. That was discontinued later in the 1890s when smokeless powder came around, because those are actually known as black powder Colts. Even the first generation can be referred to as the black powder Colts, but for historical accuracy, pretty much smokeless powder was on the rise in early 1900, and the black powder frames were discontinued shortly before then in the 1890s, because Colt saw that essentially coming. The second and third generations are known more as the smokeless powder Colts. The Colt revolver had a heck of a lot of popularity when it came to 1873 all the way till 1910. So it had a really good run, especially the first generation. And then the Army started looking more towards double-action revolvers and semi-automatic pistols. But up until then, this was the standard sidearm. Colt produced these all the way until 1940, and then he discontinued them for a short amount of time because not a whole lot of people wanted them. But the whole reason why they kind of came back was because a lot of people got into things like fast draw. They also saw a lot of westerns in the movies, and also for the sheer fact that it's just a nostalgic, and it was very successful and people wanted them. And so Colt in the 1950s began making these again and has continued to this day with his third generation. Well folks, this concludes my video on the history of the Colt Single Action Army. If you're interested in more videos to include the disassembly, reassembly, and cleaning of the Colt Single Action Army, stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did. If you're looking forward to the next video, I'll be seeing you on down the trail. Have a good one.